Hello! If you've made it to this video, you're likely familiar with the base functionality of the SaaS Accelerator and want to customize it in some way. Now, even better, maybe you'd like to contribute to the open source project, and we'll talk more about that later. No matter your reason for wanting to dev locally on the Accelerator, this video will walk you through setting up and running a development environment for it. You'll learn how to get the project running on your local machine and editing code in Visual Studio. Check out the URL on your screen for more information about all transactable offer types in the marketplace, including videos, hands-on labs, and sample code. Now, if you follow along with the steps in this video, you'll have the SaaS Accelerator up and running on your local machine by the time we're done. Now, this may be the longest video we've produced in the Mastering the Marketplace series. The good news is that we've placed links in the show description so you can skip directly to the section that you need or would like to focus on. We're going to look at the process of setting up your development environment all the way from an initial deployment on Azure to deploying your own custom changes back into the Azure installation. And remember, this is a long video, as I said, so check the description below to see the chapter links and skip right to each section. First things first, I need to install the SaaS Accelerator to Azure. Now, even though we'll be running our code locally, we'll still be interacting with some resources running on Azure, like a SQL Server database. The first thing I'll do is head on over to the SaaS Accelerator GitHub repository so that we can do the base installation. I want to show you where those install docs are. So to do that, I'll click the link and it'll bring up the SaaS Accelerator repo. Here we are. Now I'm going to scroll down to the installation link, and here under installation, install instructions are here. This is the fundamental script for installing the SaaS Accelerator into Azure, and we run this in the Azure Portal Cloud Shell. Now, the first thing it'll do is pull in the .NET Entity Framework. That gets deployed into the local Cloud Shell environment, followed by a clone of the GitHub repository itself. The script then walks all the way down to this deploy.ps1 PowerShell script and executes with some parameters that we'll supply during the install process. Now, here is my example of an install script, and I'm actually going to comment out the call to install Entity Framework, as that's already been done in my Cloud Shell. And note here, I'm going to be installing a specific version of the Accelerator, this one being 6.1.2. Now, if you are going to be doing development, and particularly if you want to do PRs back into our environment for us, then you probably want to remove that constraint so that you're pulling directly from the head of the main branch. I will do exactly that in my installation. And notice the web prefix that I've provided is DS02, and the resource group I'm going to deploy into, and the install script will create this resource group, is DS02 SaaS Accelerator. Great. And I'm installing myself as an administrator for the admin portal that will be deployed, and specifying East US as our deployment location. So I'll take all of this script minus the commented out line, and we'll head over to the Azure portal. Now, in the Azure portal, I want to open the Cloud Shell, which I'll do here, and that will initialize. I'm going to open it up here, and it takes just one moment to initialize this Cloud Shell, usually. Great. Our Cloud Shell is initialized. I'm going to clear the screen, and let's see what's in our Cloud Shell space. Now, I've run the installer once already, as you might in your development processes, and it's already pulled the GitHub repository locally. So I'm going to get rid of that repository and see that we're back to just having whatever my base folders are. So I will go ahead and clear the screen again, and I'm going to paste as plain text my script into the Cloud Shell. Let's go ahead and run this. One of the first things it's going to do is ask me which tenant I would like to use. Now it's going to default to the tenant that's currently active, that I'm currently running on, and I'll just accept that in this case. And then it asks me which subscription I would like to use. And again, it's going to default to the one I'm currently using. I'll accept that. And now I'm going to cut away for a bit because this install can take a few minutes to run. Figure 10 to 15 minutes maybe. Great, as you can see, my script has finished running, and there are some really important values that I want to capture that are output at the end of this script run. So I'm going to copy those and put them into my install script file just so that I have a place to keep them. And I will comment those out. There we go. So what we've just been given are all of the things that we need to set up Partner Center. So that's actually the next step along the way. We're going to now configure Partner Center with the values that we were just given. And to do that, of course, I'll pull up Partner Center itself. Now, I've already created an offer, so you don't have to watch me walk through the offer creation process in its entirety. Instead, we're just going to fill out the technical configuration. That's all that's left to configure for this offer. So I'll take the values that were given to me. This is for the landing page, and I'll plug that in. Next, I'll put in the URL of the required connection webhook. Next, my tenant ID, which goes here. And then finally, the identity of the application registration that was created for the application that's going to be running my solution. Now I'll go ahead and save draft. And at this point, I can review and publish my offer. As I said, I've configured everything else. And so over on the right, you can see that all of my status checks are green. I will go ahead and publish this, and we'll come back to it later in this video. It does take a while to publish. And by a while, I'm talking 45 minutes to an hour, something like that, to get us to preview stage. And preview stage is what we're after, this publisher sign-off stage, actually. And from here, we'll be able to test our offer once it's in that state. Now that the SaaS Accelerator is deployed onto Azure, we need to change the default configuration of some of those resources to allow it to integrate with our local development environment once we get that going. So let's see what's involved there. First of all, we need to set up our landing page app registration to allow the local debug URLs that we'll be using for localhost to be allowed to make requests through this app reg. And next, we're going to set up our SQL Server database connectivity, but we'll do that as a separate activity. So first, let's go in and set up our app registration. Now to do this, I'll go ahead and get rid of my Cloud Shell. We're going to go to App Registrations in the Azure portal, and I'll filter down to just the ones that I own. In this case, notice that we're looking at two app registrations that were created as part of my install DSO2 fulfillment app reg and landing page app reg. We're going to go into the landing page app reg and look at its authentication tab. On this authentication tab, you see all of the URLs for the admin portal and for the landing page that are going to interact with this app registration. And what we have to do is put in the URLs that we're going to be running as on our local machine. So what that typically looks like is something like this. I'll add a URL and it'll be something like HTTPS localhost and then maybe the port that my application is going to run on. And note that I do need to put in replicas of each one of the entries on this page. I'll show you that once it's complete, so you don't have to watch me put all that in. Okay, I've input all of the values that I need on this app registration in the redirect URIs, and I'll now save that configuration. Great. Now the next thing I need to do is head over to my SQL server, and we'll configure that. I'm going to go through the resource group that was created, and here I'll find my SQL database and my SQL server. I'll try and get into my SQL database. An easy way to do that is through Query Editor, and at this point I have no idea what my password is for this SQL server. Well, it actually doesn't matter for this first pass. I'm just going to type something in and I'll say OK. Now what's going to happen is that SQL Server will come back to me and say, I'm sorry, but you can't talk to me directly. And what we'll do is click this link down here, allow list IP, and it gives the IP. And notice in the upper right hand corner, successfully updated server firewall rules. All right, great. So this is done. For now, I just want that firewall rule in place. So great, our Azure resources are configured to work with our local environment, but we haven't really done anything locally yet. For that, we need to get the code. Now, if you're comfortable with forking and cloning GitHub repositories, you may not need this section. You may decide to skip it and move on to the next one. But for those who would like to see my preferred way of cloning this code and working with it, stay with me and we'll get it done. There are two basic things we need to do. We need to fork the repository and then clone that repository onto my local machine. Before we go any further, I'll also mention that I'd love it if you, like I, worked on a dedicated dev branch. So once we clone this code down to my local machine, this makes it much easier to accept PRs. And by the way, our team looks exactly like this when you submit pull requests to us. We really appreciate that. Now to get moving, we're going to head over to the SaaS Accelerator and fork that code. Here we are at the SaaS Accelerator. I'll come up to this fork option and we can see that there are already 108 forks of this repository at this time. And I'll select an owner for it, which will be me. Now I like to put a different name on my repository than the one I'm forking from. Just kind of signals to me visually that it's a fork. And I'll go ahead and just copy the main branch. So I'll create fork, and that takes just a moment for that fork to get created. Once that's done, I'll pull the code locally. And to do that, I'm now on my fork. I will copy the URL of the repository and head over to my command line here and simply type git clone, paste in the name of my repository. Now there you go, there's my code. So I'll go ahead and cd into there, and I'm in my source directory. So with this, you can see that I've got a few project folders there, and I have my main base solution file, which I'll go ahead and invoke on the command line, opening Visual Studio. Now that I've got my code in place and our Azure integrations are set up, we need to configure some things in our local code projects. I'll be using Visual Studio for my code editor. I won't use any features that aren't available in the free community version, but also feel free to use your own .NET editor for this work. We're just using an ASP.NET MVC project, so use whatever you're comfortable with. There are two websites in the project, and we need to configure configuration files for each one. Specifically, we're going to fill out appsettings.development.json on each one of our projects. Let's head over to Visual Studio, see those files and what I'm talking about. Now, notice that my default project currently is set to the admin site, so we'll just start there. And notice when I first cloned this repository, there's a file here named appsettings.development.json.rename. This file is configured this way or named this way so that we don't have to worry about checking in our credentials or sensitive information into GitHub. And the app settings.development.json file is the one we actually want to put our settings into, and it's in gitignore, so it won't be pushed up into the repo. Now I'm just going to start by uncommenting all of that, and notice that some values are provided for you that you don't have to worry about. You need to go out and get your tenant ID, client ID, and these sorts of fields to put into this configuration file so that it can talk to those resources on Azure. Let's have a look at how we might do that. First, let's go ahead and jump into our resource group that we created earlier, and I'll go to the DSO2 admin website or web app, and in here I'll jump down to configuration. These are the environmental variables or configuration settings of this application. Notice that what's being asked for in that app registration file is present in these settings, like client ID. So if I look at client ID, actually in my case I've got a little filter on that blurs that out. So I'll just go ahead and grab that from here. Over in my settings file, I'll drop in the client ID setting. So I can get most of the settings that I'm going to need from this set of values. The two exceptions to that are here. Let's see, the client's secret, and if we scroll down, the default connection string, or the connection string to our database. And we'll see how those get picked up in just a few minutes. First of all, I'm going to go through and set up all of the values that I need to from my web app and put them into my app registration file. So that's going to take just a moment. I'll pause while I do that. Okay, now I've got most of my settings configured here. Again, there are two that I don't, one being the client secret and the other being the connection string to our database. That's going to include the password in it. So in both of these cases, the secret and the default connection, these have been put into a Key Vault repository that happened during installation. Now, hopefully you were the person who installed the accelerator, because that'll give you direct access to that Key Vault and you'll be able to look inside it. Otherwise, you may need to reach out to the person who did the install on Azure and get those values. Now, let's jump back into our resource group and jump into this Key Vault. And from here, we'll jump down to secrets and notice that we have two of them. One, the Azure AD application secret. Here's my secret value. I'm just going to copy it and pop it into my configuration file. And then now we need the connection to the database. So let's go back one here and note that I've got my default connection. I'll drop down into here and copy that to my clipboard. I'll then drop it into my configuration file. Now notice that I now have a username and password should I want to get into that SQL database that we set up earlier. So that gives us what we need in our app settings.development.json file, and now we're ready to run our application. Let's start with the admin project, since that's where we've configured our app settings. Notice that we are set with our admin site as the default project, so we know that's where it's going to run. Okay, it's time to launch our application. Notice up here, I'm able to toggle between different profiles for debugging. I'm going to select this one that is defined in my launch settings file over here. You can see that I'm using the Microsoft Marketplace SaaS Web debug environment. With that, let's go ahead and click on debug for that environment. You could alternatively have used F5. And there's our browser window. Let's see what happens next. Great, I'm presented with the admin page for the accelerator. Now, I'll admit this is the second time I've run this. I did it once just before I recorded, and it had me log in. So you'll notice that I'm logged in up here. The first time you run it, it'll ask you to log in as well. Now that we've seen the admin project run, let's turn our attention to the landing page. Now we'll do a couple of things here. The first of which is I'll take app settings, the file that we've been working with, and I'll copy that. And I'm going to drop it down into the customer site project. I'll just paste it right at the project level. And you can see it drops in right here under app settings development.json. It turns out that we need the exact same values in our configuration file for both projects. So we're good. I'll right click and make our customer site our default solution, selecting set as startup project. And now we should be ready to go with our landing page application. So I'll hit F5 in this case. And here we are at the view of our landing page that gets shown when the link to it doesn't come from the marketplace. Now, in order to get that view to show up, the one that you're most likely wanting to customize, we have to do a little something different starting back in Partner Center. Here we are back in Partner Center looking at the offer that we created previously, or at least that we filled in the technical configuration for it and then published it. Now I'm able to select one of these two links to make a test purchase of my product. Now the reason I do this is because in a moment you'll see that we get issued a marketplace token going to the landing page when we go through the purchase process. Now this is important because we need to pass that token to our landing page in order to see the experience that one gets when the link is issued from the marketplace. So I think this will all hang together once we have a look. I'm going to click on Azure Portal Preview. Great, now here I am in the Azure portal. I'm able to select one of the two plans that we created. I'll select the silver plan. We can see plans and pricing here that are set up, and all of them are $0 because this is a demo. I don't want to charge myself for anything. So I'll hit subscribe to the silver plan, and I'll use, let's see, this resource group, SaaS Accelerator purchases. And since this is the SaaS Accelerator Development Environment offer, I'm going to name this let's call it SaaS Accelerator Dev Environment 01 subscription. So this is the name of the subscription that we're actually creating. Now I'll come down to recurring billing, turn that off, and notice that I do have an opportunity to change my billing terms. I'm fine with 1 month subscription, so I'll just hit review and subscribe. And with that, I'll scroll down and select subscribe. After this SaaS offer provisions, the configure account now button that you see on your screen will light up. As soon as that happens, we'll be able to click it and it will take us to our landing page. Now, it won't take us to our local debug landing page, of course, but the one that we installed onto Azure earlier and then put its URL into Partner Center. There you go. You can see the Configure Account Now button is enabled. So I'll click it and it takes us to that DSO2 installation that we made at the very beginning of this video, at the very beginning of this module. And here we can see the landing page from the perspective of a customer who's going through the subscription process. Great. You've seen this landing page before in other modules, so I won't belabor it here. I can now hit subscribe. And that was fine, but it didn't really matter. What's most important here is that when we look at the URL presented to us at the top of the screen, we've got this token equals and then a long string, right? So we want to take that query parameter of token equals, we're going to copy that, move back over into Visual Studio, and I'm going to run our landing page again, our landing page product, the customer site project actually. So there we go, it's going to pop up and run. and give us a browser window. It's asking us to allow access through the firewall on our local machine. We'll go ahead and do that. And again, we're looking at the view of the page that everyone sees, not the one that we get when the URL is issued with the token, the marketplace token from the marketplace. So I'll just paste that on to the end, and we're going to be taken to that same page, but we're going to receive a very different experience. Here we have the subscription details, and we can go ahead and subscribe to this offer. This is exactly what we saw just a moment ago in our production live site, but here it's running on my local host. Now that we've gotten our SaaS Accelerator running locally, it's time to make a small change to it and then deploy it to Azure. There are a couple of ways that we can do this. The two common ways to upload your changes to Azure are directly from Visual Studio or from GitHub using an update script from the Cloud Shell, just like we did in the original install to Azure. I'll show you how to do it this way. Updating a website from Visual Studio is fairly straightforward, so we'll be using the technique of updating our website using GitHub and the Azure Portal Cloud Shell. That just feels a little bit better, more stable, more professional to me, so that's where we'll stick. To get started, let's go make a change to the application. Now I'm going to make an extremely small change to the application, but it's one that you actually might be interested in. I'm here let's close up the admin site. I'm in the customer site and I'm under www.root CSS. And we might want to make a change to just a color in our web page. So I'm going to change the background color of the top nav bar to green. And to see that work, let's just run the application again in debug mode, see what that looks like. There we can see that it's green. What great. We've made a change to our landing page, so we know that it works. We could drop in that token again and note that the color change should be affected on the other view of our landing page, the one that comes from the marketplace link. And indeed, it is taken care of there as well. We'll take our next step back here on the command line, and I'll just take a look real quick at the changes that we've made. We've made a couple to our configuration files and obviously to our CSS. So I'm going to go ahead and do a git commit actually, and I will say demo commit, and then we'll do a git push, and we want our change to be back up in our GitHub repository so that we'll be able to deploy it from our repository. Let's see how that's done. First of all, I'm going to head over to the SaaS Accelerator website, and we'll go back over to the installation page. So we'll go to installation instructions and scroll down just a little bit beneath where we were before and see that now we have an update script, update to a newer version of the accelerator. This is the one we want to use. So I'm going to copy that, and we'll head back over to Visual Studio Code where I was working before on our installation script, and we'll drop down to new section and put our code here. Now remember our web name prefix, it was DSO2, and of course we've got it right up here. So I'll just copy the resource group name right there. Now that may seem like all we need to do, but it isn't. We also want to come up and change this repository to be the one that we've been working from, the one that we just committed to, which is DS underscore commercial marketplace. Now we're going to pull from our repo that's actually a fork, and we just want to deploy our main head branch. We could and probably should be working on a developer branch here, but for our purposes we're just working on the head of main. So we'll take this, and now I'm going to use this installer There we go. Back over in our Azure portal in the Cloud Shell. I'm going to open up this Cloud Shell environment. I'm going to clear the screen and right-click, paste as plain text. There we can see the update script that we're about to run. Let's go ahead and run it. This is going to run for a few minutes, so I will pause and come back to you once the update script is finished. Excellent. Our update script has completed, and now let's pop over to our landing page. And it is green now. That's great. And notice that this is our live site at DSO2 portal. So we know that our changes are now in effect. All right, we covered a lot of ground in this video. Hopefully it helped you get going with the SaaS Accelerator to make your own customizations. We went through everything from installing the accelerator all the way to deploying our changes from GitHub back into our Azure Dev environment. Now, if you need to revisit a given section of this video, use the links below to skip to a specific chapter. Thank you for joining us for another video from Mastering the Marketplace, the learning library where technologists go to get their offer on the Microsoft Marketplace. For more videos, hands-on labs, and sample code, find us at aka.ms/masteringthemarketplace.